this popular semi-racism is very similar in many forms, in many ways, to anti-Semitism that we have already seen. And you know, one thing puzzles me. Given all the education that modern European and Western culture has received on what happened to the Jews during the Second World War, it's never ending. And the Israelis use it in a cynical way to get their own way in the world. But otherwise, it's something on which people are very well informed. In fact, in a culture in which history is by and large being relegated to the sidelines or virtually binned or taught in modules, the one thing people know about is the Second World War. And so deep does this thing go that some idiot politicians, not so long ago, in the 1990s, late 90s, early 21st century politicians, Tony Blair for one, actually I heard him say on television that the Second World War was a war fought to save the Jews. I mean, just the level of ignorance and cynicism that goes into that remark is quite horrific. I mean, no one asked him from the journals present, well, if that's the case, we lost the war. Because you didn't succeed in saving them. You didn't, in fact, even send your bombers in to bomb one of the concentration camps in which Jews were being held, despite their requests that you do so. Because bombers couldn't be diverted from the main task, which was the destruction of Germany. You know, it was a war. But this is a common view. Okay, we can argue about that, how it should be taught and how it shouldn't be taught, but the effect of it must be very minimal if what is taught is so superficial that the roots of anti-Semitism aren't discussed at all, because were they, then that would also educate the people about treating any minorities in the same way. You would learn some lessons, and those lessons clearly haven't been learned. It's not that Islam is a religion and a culture without a history in Europe. The novels I've written called the Islam Quintet are historical novels set in the period when Islam was a normal, major part of European culture, and in fact a very advanced one, intellectually, in the Iberian Peninsula, in Sicily. And one reason for writing these novels is really to both inform, educate, and entertain people that this was considered normal. And the expulsion of the Muslims and the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula in the 15th and 16th centuries created the new European identity. And that identity is now being challenged, ironically, by a new influx of Muslims, but mainly migrant Muslims, who come to find work, largely from countries that were colonized by the Western powers. And they are now, you know, a few millions all over Europe. Not huge, but a minority which they feel can't be ignored. And this is creating popular anger. I mean, the National Front in France campaigned very strongly against them. The British National Party in this country campaigned very strongly against the Muslims in the north and in Dagenham. So this is going to go on. Obviously, it goes without saying that it has to be resisted, and it has to be combated, and it has to be fought. Not that all the problems that confront the different groups of people of Muslim origin in Europe are the same. Because what racists and liberals blinded by prejudice, or ex-liberals, now neocons blinded by prejudice, like, what is the name of that Daily Mail columnist who used to be on the document? Melanie Phillips.
Yes.
People like that. There's a whole group of them who essentially do little else but produce Islam non-stop. And this has to be resisted. It can't be accepted. We can't just take it like that. And now we've had, more recently, a scandal within Amnesty International created by people who, once were on the left, challenging Amnesty's defense of political prisoners from Guantanamo, saying that these political prisoners have a bad attitude to feminism. They probably do, so what? You argue with them. I'm not in favor of caving into any one of central issues that I believe in, socialism, feminism, whatever you want. You argue with people. But to say that they shouldn't be given a platform to explain what happened to them in Guantanamo is unacceptable. Or to say that, as the many German Greens did, that the war in Afghanistan was justifiable because we were going to liberate women. The number of German Green women I argued with all over Germany in 2002, 2003, 2004, and it goes on. Now they're learning 80% of the German population wants out of Afghanistan, and 60 to 70% of the British population wants out of Afghanistan. So some things are beginning to trickle through, of which one is that this wasn't a war to liberate the women of Afghanistan, any more than the Second World War was a war to liberate the Jews from Hitler. These things aren't carried out to liberate people, they're carried out essentially to preserve and defend Western interests, whatever they may happen to be or however they are defined at that particular time. So the attitudes are different in different countries, and the migrant populations of Muslim origin, as of any other origin by the way, integrate as best they see fit, and they do so. I mean, in Britain you have Muslim members of Parliament, of New Labour, Muslim members of the Conservative Party, Muslim members of the Lib Dems, and people from Muslim origin in the Socialist Workers' Party and in other groups of the left. Fine, that's normal, that's as it should be. The notion that any one people, any one culture is a huge, undifferentiated blob is never the case. Never was, and never will be. But we know the situation in Europe well. The Germans called their migrants guest workers, so that the name was not thoughtless. If you're a guest, you can always be asked to leave. They were temporary workers. In France, they were French citizens. From the beginning, you're a citizen of a French colony, you're a citizen of the French Commonwealth, you're a citizen of France. And these young kids who went to French schools and were told, when you leave these schools, you're going to be a French citizen with all the rights of a French citizen, and then they find out, surprise, surprise, that 90% of them suffer discrimination when they leave school, leave alone university, in terms of getting jobs. This is all documented. And when the police attack them, and in some cases kill them, these young, new French kids of Muslim origin are so well integrated that they do what the French normally do when they're repressed. They attack property, they build barricades, and they defend themselves. And what would the history of France be without them? 1789, 1793, 1848, 1871, 1968. There's a continuum. And these kids, I tell my French friends sometimes, are so well integrated in your country that they have internalized its history, and you should have more respect for it. And then what do we see in the United States? A similar pattern in a country of immigrants. They're all migrants in the United States. Some went, in the 16th century. Some a tiny bit earlier, but it is a nation, a state, rather, of migrants, and they've been very proud of it. And now they're panicking against two sets of migrants, new migrants. Hispanic, who are huge, and who I hope soon will take that country over. and Muslims, since 9/11. But it's so crazy because the overwhelming bulk of the Muslim community in the United States, some millions, are essentially most of them are not even workers. They're doctors, engineers, technicians. That's the basis on which they've been let in. Some trickled in by other means, and even they're taxi drivers. I mean, it's difficult to travel in New York without talking to a South Asian taxi driver. Many Muslims, many non-Muslims, but they're all from South Asia. And the language they usually speak to each other on their mobile phones is Punjabi, which is very good for me because I know exactly what they're up to.